I've already made some cuts with this bandsaw I'm building, but it would really help to have some blade guides. And these are the blade guides from my 20-inch bandsaw, the upper blade guide and the lower blade guide. And I quite like this design, so I just printed out the plans for this again, and I'll build these almost exactly the same. Both of these blade guides have this little block in common, and the machine screws are screwed straight into that. And so I used some very hard maple, and I've already marked where the notch needs to go. I could use my 1:1 template to get the hole locations for these, but instead I just read the dimensions off the drawing and then scratched that in with a caliper by marking it off the edge. And tapping some machine screw threads straight into the wood. Got these blocks made, and for the top blade guide, this part just screws onto a thick piece of plywood, which is just 2 pieces of 18mm plywood glued together. Now I have to mount a bearing on a bolt like this, and going through my junk bin I found this nut, which is perfect for the job because it's got a flange on it, and that will really capture this bearing and keep it centered. And I was going to just put that on here like that, but this nut doesn't come forward enough, so I have to put a washer on here, bearing on here, then this nut, and that holds it on perfectly. But for adjusting this easily, I need a screwdriver slot in the front of this bolt, just like I've got here. When drilling holes in steel, it helps to drill a small hole first and then the final sized hole. That makes the drilling much easier. And I was probably running that drill too fast, but it was already the slowest speed on that drill press. Oh, focus, damn it. Now I just need the guide blocks to go in there, like these ones, and I'm going to cut these out of a piece of lignum vitae. The bolts I used this time are a little bit bigger than the ones I used last time, just because that's what I could find, and of course I'll get a little bit more grip in the wood that way too. So I had to cut some slight notches out of these guide blocks to make them fit at the right angle. The other thing I did different is these blocks are a fair bit wider than the ones here. That's because these ones I made so I could use them with an 1.5 inch wide sawmill blade. But for my new 26-inch bandsaw, I don't plan on buying one of those blades either. And these ones will run a 1-inch blade just fine, which I don't think I'll go wider than that. The lower blade guide has a different mount, and that consists of 2 pieces of plywood glued together. So I've already glued 2 pieces together here, and this time I'm just going to use the templates to mark everything out. My slot mortars would do a much better job cutting these slots, but I'm just showing that you can do this on a drill press. See that bandsaw shaking? I really need to balance those wheels. This time I'm using a bunch of lock washers to keep that bearing centered. And I need a washer on the back, and just put that on here. I'm just using hex bolts here for now because I ran out of the nice Allen key screws. The top blade guide needs to be able to move up and down like this. And this is the column for that for my 20-inch bandsaw, and here's the top blade guide. And in fact, the new one I just made fits perfectly on here. And I need to make another blade guide column, and here's my blank piece for that. I made a spontaneous design tweak, which is to leave this ridge here and cut a slot for it here. And that prevents this thing from kind of tipping forward too much as I move it forward. Because the way I want this, I don't want this to stick out the back. So it goes from here to forward a bit. So the bolt can go right about here, and then I can move that far forward. I'll just mark that. Now I need to cut a notch out of here for this post to fit in there, and for that I have to figure out exactly where the blade runs. And also it's about 35 millimeters from here to the center of the wheel. I need to position the blade guides so that they center on where the blade runs. So the notch needs to go right up to about here so that the column fits in the right spot. And it needs to move back far enough so that the front of the guide corresponds roughly to the center of the wheels, which is 35 millimeters ahead of the frame. So going 35 millimeters here, like so, needs to go down to about here. Got it all laid out and checked, so now I'm ready to cut a chunk out of that frame. Whoops. I need to put a threaded rod in here, and last time I drilled the hole bigger and glued it in with construction adhesive, but I don't have a tube that I started around. So instead, I ground a sort of primitive thread cutter onto the end of this threaded rod, and this hole is a little bit undersized, and I'm just going to screw it in. And if that comes out, I can always re-glue it. I'm gluing on this block of hardwood to get a bit more bearing surface for my blade guide column. Ah, clamp's too short. Ah. I chiseled out the middle of the space a bit so that this column only rests on the ends, which would make it more stable. And then this bracket with that bevel I just cut goes on here, presses it into the corner, and this thing goes on the back to have something for it to pull against. So when the nut pushes down on here, that'll press the column into the corner there. So this wheel is quite heavy around here, but I want to save doing the final balancing once it's varnished. So for now I'm just going to stick some bolts in here for a counterweight, and hopefully that will get rid of much of the shaking. So I think that's shaking less than it used to be, but I'm kind of close to the saw's resonant frequency, so if I lower the saw's frequency by putting this weight on it, the shaking gets worse. And now with 2 weights, see the shaking? And less shaking. So this shaking is a funny sort of thing. With my 14-inch bandsaw, I actually found if I put it on a really wobbly stand, it shook less. This is all a very temporary sort of setup, just so I can start using the saw before it's done. Now the final table is probably going to come up to about here, because it's a fair bit thicker. And the maximum resaw height will be 38 centimeters or 15 inches. So I just took the bandsaw off of this dolly, and that totally changes the shaking situation. There's no noticeable shaking now, but that's something I'll tweak later once I've got the wheels fully balanced and the enclosure on it, which makes it heavier. And then if it shakes, I'll tweak that. And when I made the blade guides for my 20-inch bandsaw, I filmed that too. So in terms of how to build them, I covered a few things I skipped over in this one. So you might want to watch that video as well.